Hello. If you're looking for the Lead Intelligence webinar by T360, you're in the right place. Here with Michael Fellon. I'm Paul Hagee, lead the intelligence division at T360, and Michael leads the tech division. And we collaborate on this study that we'll be talking about today. Good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you as well. It's good to see everybody else too. I was excited about this one to get the chance to kind of work with the two different parts of T3 and also one of our valuable sponsors. So I'm excited to kind of share what we found.
Yeah, this is as we all know, this is a really hot and important topic in brokerage and in tech. Business development, as we've been talking internally, is a huge strategic item for brokerages to be focusing on, especially as they're trying to grow revenue and diversify the revenue streams, as we've talked internally.
Right.
Yeah. So want to give it a few more minutes, I guess, Michael?
Yeah, we'll give.
Do you have the slides?
Yeah, they're all ready to go. I'll share my screen and then we can roll.
Okay, sounds good. I think we can maybe get it rolling and start the slides.
All right,
dive right in.
Without further ado, you're on.
Great. So as we discussed, we worked with Prime Street. They're a client of the T3 tech division. And every now and then we do some sponsored research where a company or group comes to us and say, hey, we want to turn your research lens, or we want you to study this and provide some feedback on the structure, but really it's independent, editorially independent. We come up with a research study and we get the results. And this study was lead intelligence, which is really important, with looking at lead generation and lead conversion. And Michael and I collaborated in designing this report with the Prime Street. So thank you to Prime Street. And why don't we go into who we are briefly, Michael, the next slide.
And I'm glad you mentioned the editorial kind of independence, Paul. Anytime we get a sponsor, we're always excited to work with them and kind of turn that research lens that you've been perfecting over the past few years. And Prime Street was just the perfect example for this because they already had so much information and intelligence around leads. So they were a great partner for us to kind of like do our own kind of set of research and compare it against. And so I'm excited for us to kind of share that. So I'll go first and then you can jump in. As Paul said, my name is Michael Phelan. I'm the SVP of brokerage and marketing for, technology and marketing for brokerage. Prime Street is one of our clients. It's part of the T3 Insiders program. And as part of our consulting with them, we produced this piece of research, which Paul helped us to produce.
Yep. And I'm Paul Hagee. I run what we're calling an intelligence division at T360, which includes all of our publications, our research, all the items that we put out, like the Wonderful Trends report, the Real Estate Almanac, and the various reports like these help shape and lead in collaboration with partners like Michael, or colleagues like Michael. So, yeah, as we mentioned, this type of research is really important and really valuable, and we are going to increasingly do this more, allowing companies to kind of help use some of their expertise, even some of their data, but we're independently validating the data and the processes and the surveys that we do, and then the analysis of it. It just opens up and expands the opportunities for us all, and then we can deliver it to the industry at large and give them kind of like a solid methodology and some key, very valuable takeaways like we'll go over today. Right, Michael?
Yeah. And I think that's the important part, again, just kind of underlining that piece that, while Prime Street is a client of T360's and we're excited to work with them, this research that we did kind of built upon research they already had that, like, as you said, we validated it, but it doesn't make what they've done any less important. And I think it's really great to get that kind of head start on it. And anybody that kind of wants to talk to Prime Street and hear more about how they can help them with lead generation, we got a link here for y'all so you can go check them out. They're relatively new in the industry. I mean, they've been around for a few years, but they're definitely coming on strong. And again, just a really great partner. And if you're thinking about
maybe give a brief overview of what their offering is.
Yeah, Prime Street AI, Yeah, what they do primarily, and they've got a couple different products. I'll address one specifically. What they primarily do is they work with brokerages that are generating their own leads, and then they help them drive their conversion rates up. And what's interesting is that they claim that they can generate, depending on the brokerage, a 3x improvement in a conversion rate for a brokerage. And when we first started talking to them and working with them, we're like, well, how? Tell us how that process, right? And that's where this kind of research study was born out of. And they do it through a combination of technology, and kind of human touch, right? And then thoroughly understanding the whole lead conversion process, right? So rather than leaving things up to chance, they've got process built around it. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So I'd encourage people, if people are thinking about, wanting to improve their lead conversion, they'd be great to talk to, and get you a little bit of insight.
Great. So we have a flow for today's conversation. This will be relatively short and punchy. We want to just give some of the highlights of the report, give some context around it, and then encourage you to download the report itself. Again, this is the research T360 did independently, and we went and surveyed a bunch of brokerages to get the results. So this is just analysis that we're finding. Of course, it overlaps with the proprietary world, but so we're that's the flow of today's conversation. So I think we can jump straight into context, or unless you have something else to add, Michael.
Yeah, and why don't we just add a little bit kind of about who we polled, who we surveyed. One of the things that T3 does an excellent job of is kind of keeping their fingers or on kind of who's actually top real estate brokerages across the United States. And we've talked about that being the Mega 1000 in the past. So we started with our Mega 1000 and then broke that down so that we had a representative sample of the industry. So we had large firms with thousands of agents, and we had small firms, we had independent firms, we had franchises, and we kind of threw them all in here and ended up with 56 respondents that responded to our request. And so I think we estimated, or didn't estimate, like 120,000 agents were represented this. So while 56 firms may seem like a fairly small sample size, and of course we'd always rather have more data, I still think it represents 56 of the top firms in the industry and about 120,000 agents. So
it's a pretty broad distribution of, like you mentioned, the diversity of firms, and like all told, the combined sales volume is about 60 billion of the respondents, and about a user count of 155,000. So this is a significant. Some of these are the largest companies, among the largest companies in the U.S. So there's some real insights to get from this study.
And what I loved about it, Paul, when we got started, we got, why did we choose to study lead generation? Obviously, being in the technology division, we get asked this question by brokerages almost daily. The division did some research that's a couple of years old now, but I'm sure it's just as relevant today as it once was, which is, we did a study of 10,000 agents and asked them what they most wanted from their brokers, and they said lead gen. So no surprise there. And then, when we are doing our research, and then also comparing that against some of the research that NAR does, somewhere between 10 and 12% of a broker's overall sales volume will come from some form of online lead generation, right? So we're kind of lumping a few different things together, but it's some form of online lead generation. And what I found fascinating is, so NAR's been reporting that stat or a version of that stat for many years, hasn't really changed a whole lot. We went and did this study and we came up with almost the exact same number. So it kind of validated that for us. So again, for an individual brokerage, about 12% of their 10 to 12% of their overall sales volume will be generated from online. And then, I thought the other piece of that was really interesting. I always try to put context around that. I'm like, well, 10 to 12% doesn't sound that impressive. But if you were a $1.5 billion total sales volume brokerage and you applied that percentage to it, we're talking about $180 million of sales volume. So not an inconsequential amount of additional volume. So I don't think there's many brokers out there who would sneeze at another 180 million. So I think
they welcome that.
Yeah. I think this is a great kind of area to spend a little bit of time.
Yep. Okay, we can jump to next. This kind of defines. We wanted to clearly define what we were talking about and studying in this study, of course. So we clearly define an online lead as an unknown, unaffiliated consumer from an online source who provides at least one piece of contact information and intends to buy or sell real estate. You'll use ancillary services. And so, and Michael, you and I went through this when we were designing this. Is like, there's a lot of assumptions or when you say lead or online lead, it can cover a lot of
Yeah.
ground. So we wanted to narrow it and really focus so the respondents could answer the question kind of accurately and we could interpret the results accurately. So
Yeah.
for the purpose of this study, that's the lens with which we were
This is an
evaluating.
area that you and I have talked about doing more work in the future. You know, one of my frustrations when I get on with a technology vendor that tends to work in the top of the funnel is they'll be like, we generate X number of leads, right? And I'll be like, well, tell me what a lead is, right? And I almost
Yeah.
always get a different answer every single time. And I remember from when I was working in brokerage, that's an incredibly frustrating exercise to go through with a technology vendor because it makes it really hard to compare apples to apples, right? And to be efficient with your spend. So I think I was really excited to sit with you and kind of wrap our heads around how does T3 want to define a lead? So this was kind of exciting to me, even just to take this fairly very much a beginning step, but for the industry sake, this is how we're going to define
Well,
it.
there's two sides of this. One is getting the clear definition, and then two is for brokerages and technology firms to then measure
Right.
accurately. And those are two huge, and we're working, putting a lot of energy internally within T360 to align those, help companies align those, because we're seeing we're building a lot of data and intelligence based off of that you can start benchmarking, and it's actually useful. But that clean data is really a big first step.
Yeah, and I, you know, and kind of just jumping into this next slide here, you know,
Yeah.
again, I like starting with a little bit of background data, right? You know, one of the things I learned in business school many, many years ago is like to do this kind of overview of the industry that you're studying and try to understand it. So I started with a real top level stat here, right? Which I thought was interesting. You know, for this whole industry of demand gen, or excuse me, lead gen, digital lead gen is about $4.6 billion in the industry. Now, this is not specific to real estate. This is all. So we're not talking about an inconsequential piece of kind of the business environment. But for our industry, and these are real estate stats, and these are widely debated and argued all over the place because of how people define leads, right? Everybody defines them differently. But
And
there's
measure them.
yeah, how do you? There's this massive range, anywhere between $20 and $100, and I've seen numbers even north of $100. But somewhere in that range is about how much a lead costs, depending on how you're defining it. But then this is the stat that just makes my stomach fall out, which is that the average conversion rate is 0.4% to 1.2. Now I will jump right in, and I know you got some thoughts on this too, Paul, but I will jump right in and be like,
Yeah.
I believe part of the reason this stat is so low is because the industry does not have a clear definition of an online lead. I think for some people, they define it as a registration or they define it as a Facebook lead. Other people define it as a lead they purchased from Zillow or somebody like that. You know, other people define it as something to generate from their own website. So there's a huge issue here that I think nobody's clear on. But I don't think there's anybody in the industry that argue that lead conversion is very low.
Yep. Yep. I second that. And this is part of the study we're hoping to clarify. And this is the beginning step in that,
Yeah,
or
and so
continuous step.
when I'm working with a brokerage, I always start with if they've asked us to kind of help them analyze their real estate lead kind of program and lead processing, how many industries out there would find it acceptable to throw away 98% of their raw materials? So if you're going to Starbucks and you get a cup of coffee, if they literally poured out 98 cups of coffee for everyone they sold, that's what we're talking about, right? So that's what I really want the industry to think about is like, you've got all of this waste. And, you know, without getting into the kind of some of the latest news around settlement and whatnot, every brokerage is focused on being more profitable, right? They've got to learn to run on narrower margins. And when you're throwing away 98% of your raw materials, I mean, that's an excellent place to start, right? So, because you've
Yep.
already paid for it. So if you can just simply convert more from it. So I think that's a really important piece here.
Yep. So here we have, this is where you can get the report. So we're going to give some highlights as we do, some context, but here it is, a 17-page report. We have executive summary. We just dive into the methodology. We have some charts, and we have some actionable takeaways, which I think is really great, Michael. I think if nobody else just read the rest of it and just pulled up the actual takeaways, which we'll go into in a few slides down the road, it's just really, really fantastic. So the QR code is here. You can go straight to the URL listed there and download the PDF of the study.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just we're going to obviously give you a little bit more context if you hang with us. So I encourage you to kind of stay and hang with Paul and I. But if you're busy and you just want to get the report or you want to read along, go grab it right now. So we'll jump into some of the findings. Paul, do you want to kind of hit this first one?
Sure. Um, so this one is kind of self-evident, which I think was interesting in some of the research, and you mentioned it earlier, is like the research kind of reconfirmed some of the basic smart operating process of a business, but it's good to just see it and the data supports it. So with a defined process for generating leads and converting them and having a lead management process, it's just obviously you'll have a better result. And that's something we want to reinforce. And I know you coach that within the division, and we coach it in general at T3. You gotta have a process and measure accordingly. And this is what we found. And there's a lot of companies that with successful lead generation programs, and you can't have it without a really refined systems and processes and the technology that supports it.
Yeah, and so this is like it's almost like, well, no duh, right? I mean, but I mean, like this is like one of those things, right? So we surveyed these 54 different brokerages, and one of the things that jumped out when we were doing the statistical analysis was that if they had any process at all, that's what I want everybody to take away from this today. It was like any process, just
Complete
have a
process.
process. You will actually do a reasonably good job with your conversion. Now, of course, you know, you can hire people like T360 and we can help you refine that process and extract a whole lot more value from it. But at the end of the day, almost any process will improve it. So that's what we would tell you to do. And you know, when we're working with a client and we're having them focus on this piece, we're like, the first step is to map your current process, right? And it's like, literally tell me how you start how this starts and then follow it all the way to the end. And then you can kind of work on refining it. So if you do
And
nothing else, go ahead.
I love those itemized, this is what you should at least measure. And that's very important. That comes from like all the intelligence and all the perspective you guys have in the tech team, and also consulting with brokerages within that and doing these blueprints as you say. That is really valuable. I think that's one of the key takeaways of this report. Obviously, it's our actual findings, but it's
Yeah.
powerful.
And what I thought was funny about when we did the research, this is another example, just measure something, right? It was almost better, but without getting into what they were measuring, which we did in a follow-up question, we just said, how many things do you measure and how does that impact your confidence? And there was a correlation, statistical correlation. If they measured at least 3 metrics, didn't matter which ones, just measured 3 things, they had a much higher confident, or they were more confident in their ability to convert. I just want to put kind of a little bit of an asterisk on that. Paul and I would have loved to have spent a year doing this research and gathering all different pieces of it. So all we did was scratch the surface, and that was
Yes.
was really just to get the ball rolling. So you know, we've got a ton of additional research questions that we're eager to dig into. That we, you know, that we
And we
have.
have some that we're planning for that we'll be delivering. We have the T3 Tech Summit coming up in the
Yes.
fall. We have the Tech Guide coming up. We're going to pull, this is the beginning of a kind of a whole research theme we're going to be pulling on this year because it's a big one for a lot of folks in the industry.
Absolutely. So you want to do the second finding here?
Sure. I mean, again, to your point, no duh, build a blueprint for consistency and speed. As we know, speed is a huge deal for managing leads and converting leads effectively, but also just having the system in place so you can treat these leads and make sure that each one is getting responded to well and you can extract the most value out of it. Because otherwise, without that, you're going to be waste. To your point, the slide at the beginning, there's going to be a lot of waste, which is what's happening now in industry. And this is, I'm sure you can talk to some of like how brokerages are set up and some of how this is an inherent challenge with how the independent contractor structure but this is just something that's really critical to finding success here.
Yeah, and I realized that something cut off part of our line there.
Yeah.
So let me do a because this is a really important point. I'm going to stop a share. I think it was just a remnant of something. Let's see. Bear with me. Fill the dead air there, Paul.
Okay. So we're these are, we'll be having some of these other actionable findings. This is just, it's almost pointing to what are some of the basic business areas to shore up and focus on, especially related to online lead gen.
Yeah, and this is one thing that, sorry, this is why I wanted to take the time to reset that slide and figure out what was going on there. But this is something that we began talking about at last year's Tech Summit, this whole concept of demand generation, marketing qualified leads, and sales qualified leads. I think as you begin to map out your process, and this will be different for every brokerage based on your culture, your business model, precedent, things like that. But figure out when you think a lead transitions from marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead. And the key piece of that I want everybody to think about is when it's ready for an agent, right? And we all know that agents struggle if a lead needs to be nurtured over the long term, or there's not a high degree of intent by the lead's part, right? So every brokerage is going to be different, but just figure out where that transition period is. And I'll give everybody a hint. You almost always are sending your leads to your agents too early, right? And so like you need to be thinking in today's day and age, how you can nurture that lead long enough to get it transaction ready is a term we use a lot in the technology division, and then pass it to your agent. And guess what? Well-trained agents that get the lead at the right time, their conversion rates can hit 10, 12%, right? So, I mean, we can literally go from 1% to 20 to 12% by the brokerage just managing the marketing qualified portion of it.
And I think some of these simple steps and like putting them in place, because right now you see that lead conversion rate and the opportunity seems like such a challenge and so hard, but the potential here for brokerages to grow their revenue using this and also expand or diversify their revenue stream is right there. This is really possible with some simple pieces put in place. Not easy necessarily, but simple and
Yeah.
focused energy you'll get results.
And I love the fact that you said that these aren't easy. It's easy for us to stand up and tell everybody what to do when the execution gets a lot harder. And I always, try to be very empathetic to that. But you're right. I mean, this is the first step. You first got to know what to do, and then you can kind of work on doing it. But the point that you made, this can be really profitable work, right? Because there's an opportunity especially brokerage leaders that are looking to claw back some margin. This is an area that they can, right? They have, in most cases, the resources to develop these leads, turn them into transaction ready, and then potentially pass them with a referral fee, which can dramatically improve the profitability of the
In
transaction.
their position, through the scale and through the resources to help, it's a win-win, as for agents and for them.
So, and I think then we can move off this slide in just a second, is just the early stages when a lead is in the marketing qualified stage, speed and consistency, because I don't think we hit that hard enough. Those are some of the most important pieces that we found in the research. Again, no surprise here. But the part that I think is maybe a little bit new thinking is that's only a portion of the process, right? Then the rest of your process has to be all about moving that to the agent at the right time. One more, Paul.
Yes, get it.
You want to do this one?
Yeah, we've got to drive it. Let's move the slide ahead.
Did it not change? Are you guys not seeing my screen?
No. Well, the next one is the challenge the business rules or established processes, and if we can't, it's not advancing, which is okay. I can talk about it. I know where we have there. And I love this one because this is one you have seen, and I think even your work when you were in your brokerage previously, we're challenging kind of the assumption or the established business practice of my listing, my lead in particular. And this is a really valuable principle too, is just evaluate what we're doing and why is it working. And that's one in particular that I know you have a lot of perspective on that one because it's a very compelling one.
Yeah, so the industry has a history of moving leads that are generated by a listing agent's listing directly to the listing agent. Yet when you look at the kind of the composition of the leads generated by the brokerage, a large percentage of those are going to be what we'll refer to as, they're generated by their own listings, by the brokerage's own listings. And let's all be honest, part of the reason the conversion rates are so low is those agents are not particularly good at converting those. And I just paint a quick picture. And again, this is all based on some of our consulting work and research. What those agents tend to do is they take the absolute cream of the cream, the very top, somebody that's like transaction ready to put something under contract in the next 30 days, and they throw away everything else. Anybody that's ever been an agent and worked at an open house, I'll just use kind of a parallel. How many people that come to the open house actually buy the open house? Not very many. Same exact thing with lead generation, right? The lead that they inquire on is almost never the lead they end up buying. Yet the whole industry is built on that assumption. So I just challenge brokerages to think about that a little bit differently. Now, this is a good example. This will not work in every brokerage. There's all sorts of cultural implications that come along with this, but don't discount it at its face value. Begin to think about this. And I'll give you an example of a creative solution that we've seen work. Maybe you do a referral fee share with your listing agents, right? So if a listing generates a lead, right? Doesn't matter if that lead never closes, right? Or excuse me, it doesn't matter if that lead closes on that property. Offer your listing agent a cut of a referral fee. It can be a very small amount. They will give up those leads instantly, right? And they will be very happy to have a group of buyers agents work those leads until they kind of come to completion. So just think about that. There's an opportunity to kind of
And it doesn't feel like that if you structure it that way. It's like it doesn't seem like it's that hard to get buy-in.
No, the brokerages that have tried that strategy have been very pleased with how fast their listing agents are like, I'm fine letting you handle this piece if I get a piece of the action.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the last one that I have here, which is really kind of where, you know, Prime Street kind of comes into this, but there's Prime Street and there's some other models out there, some other vendors out there who are saying, you know what, brokerages, you are much better off paying attention to the things you're really good at. Let us handle lead conversion. Let us handle kind of lead generation. And I'll give an example, a really specific example that I think a lot of the brokerages on here will kind of relate to. It's really hard to hold agents accountable. You know, you get into the whole independent contractor thing. Sales managers just seem to have a hard time being the bad cop and telling agents that they're not following up with their leads sufficiently enough and potentially removing them from getting leads. It gets to be a very thorny situation. So where we've seen some success is for brokerages who don't have that infrastructure and don't have that culture that allowed that to happen, go hire somebody to be that person. And it's funny, when I first introduce that to brokers, sometimes they're like, we can't do that. You're crazy. And I'll be like, do you buy opposite leads or do you buy Zillow leads? They're like, yeah, we do it all the time. I'm like, that's the exact same
You just
thing.
bought it.
You just, so you just hired somebody else to convert your lead and hold your agent accountable. Why can't you do that? Or why can't you go find a vendor to do that and hopefully have a different
Because
relationship?
there's margin. There's
Different margin, right? So anyway, I again just challenge some of these things that we've all lived with for a long time in the industry, and you can potentially unlock some additional profitability here. Are you all seeing my screen again, Paul?
Yep. We're caught up now.
All right. You want to jump into this one? Takeaways for leadership?
Yes. We saw that it's interesting. The brokerage size, the correlation, the larger brokerages are better at lead generation. The smaller brokerages are better at lead conversion, which in some ways makes sense because the smaller ones are in theory more closely tied to the clients, or like watching things more closely. Management is more in tune with the ground. And at the top of the level, larger brokerages, they have more resources to invest in the lead generation that have more scale and impact there. And I'll just lead the other two.
Yeah, and almost always on those larger brokerages, they have more listings, right? And so listings we know are one of the best ways to generate activity on a website. So if you are a large brokerage, just lean into that part that you can generate a lot more leads, and then rethink how you might kind of redesign your kind of accountability portion of this to act more like a small brokerage, and then you can kind of benefit from both. Smaller brokerages are just more nimble. Brokerage culture and precedent. This is the my listing, my lead one that we kind of hammered pretty hard on that last kind of takeaways. But again, don't let these hold you back, right? I so often I go and I talk to a brokerage and like, well, that's the way we've always done it. Okay, I get that. You know, that can be a hard thing to wrestle with. But if you are under a level of strain that a lot of brokerages are right now, and their profitability is being compressed, you need to begin to think creatively. And some of these long-held kind of conventional wisdom things have been challenged in other places and have been quite successful. So don't miss those. And then the last one I'll say is drive performance with data, right? Like we started at the very beginning, just having a process and measuring something will get you off on the right track. So make sure.
And there's a lot of tools in the industry to help with this. I mean, the performance, this is a huge one. And I think maybe a lot of brokerages, it seems complex at the beginning, but there are ways to take the first couple of steps, and that there's ways to measure the performance. You can just focus on a few core things and actually really vastly improve your process and results.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is an area that, you know, we tend to get called in a lot on this area to do some additional research and help brokerages kind of look at their overall lead gen and their lead conversion and stuff like that. And you can't discount the idea of kind of working with a partner. Paul, I think we have a question that I think now's as good as time as any to try to answer it. How about I read it? Or no, I'm sorry. Do we have one more? No, we're good. We're at, I think we're right
Yeah,
towards the end.
I think we're good. I saw it and I was trying to figure out if we had a good answer for that.
Yeah,
Why don't you take a stab at
yeah,
it?
you and I talked about it, and I think we decided.
Yeah.
So, Bill, thanks for the question. So the question is, assume your research precedes massive confusion in the marketplace about compensation. It did. That information about the settlement's only a few weeks old, and we've been conducting this research kind of over the late summer and into the early fall. So it did precede that. And Paul and I talked about how this might change the findings. I'll be honest that, I think it's a little early to tell. And so the way I'm starting this conversation everywhere is that, remember, this settlement has not been approved, right? So anything that anybody out in the industry tells you is just conjecture on what we think is going to happen if it is approved.
But we do feel, I should add in here, Michael, like we do feel pretty confident, and Jack has been saying, and we've been processing and advising. We think it's likely to be approved, very likely to be approved as is, if or just with minor changes. We think it's kind of agreement, but to the point is the implications still, and like how the market's going to navigate. To your point, is still you kind of can't tell some of how this is going to shake out until it starts actually developing in practice.
And so to Bill, here's the question, right? Most leads currently are buyer leads, right? So there's no question there's going to be something that happens with buyer leads, right? Some people are asking, will there be less of them? Will they be less valuable? Probably at some level, right? I mean, so I don't think anybody can go a whole lot further than that. But lead generation has always been a mainstay of the industry. So some of the brokerages that I'm working with, I'm like, now's the time to double down on seller leads. So while everything we have talked about so far can be applied to seller leads as easily as buyer leads, right? Now I know there's far less seller leads in the market, and they tend to be a lot more expensive, which only makes the things that we've talked about so far more important.
That much more important.
Yeah, because we cannot afford to waste, right? So anyway, that's how I would answer that. I think a little soon to be told.
And so we have the option to get the report. Here it is again, the URL, the QR code. Download it easily. It's a PDF. It's easy to read, easy to pass around, easy to digest. There's a lot of insight there. And then let's give another shout out to the sponsor. I mean, this type of research, Michael, you and I love being able to dive in and think very clearly, have a really sharp methodology, get original research and data, get original data that we can then test our assumptions and get the analysis, do some statistical findings, and uncover real valuable intelligence for leaders that they can do to improve their businesses like today.
Exactly. One of my frustrations in the industry, and it's changing, certainly at T360's leadership, and then there's some other great kind of thinkers in the industry that are really trying to throw some of the anecdotes that we've all had about various things that, and really say, is that really true? Like, we've always said that, but is that really true? And to me, this whole lead generation area is ripe for that kind of study. So I'm excited. I want to thank Prime Street also again for kind of leading the way and helping the industry get smarter about this and kind of really think about lead intelligence.
Yeah, and we mentioned we have this option for companies and other organizations to partner with us and kind of direct our research lens on a topic of their interest. Again, we keep it independent, but there's some collaboration there, so like designing it, maybe some of the methodology, and to study something that we all can value from. And so you can email me. This is my email address, paul@t360.com. If you have an idea, if you want to start the conversation, we can talk about how the structure looks like and the timing and the possibilities there. But there's a lot. This is just in just the lead space. We just scratched the surface, Michael. As you know, we've talked about. We're like, oh, we see the 10 other studies we want to do.
We literally filled the legal pad with all the other questions that we wanted to dig into. So I'm excited and look forward to kind of working on some more of these.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. We hope that this research helps you and improves your business. That's kind of where our position T3, where we really wanted to help you. This is where you can go to that QR code and go to the link, c360.com, and we have a whole host of folks and Michael and larger team that are just here to help in a variety of capacities, a lot of expertise, a lot of operational experience, and increasingly a lot of intelligence that we can help firms grow and adapt and change and help them with their goals.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks for spending time with us today.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Take care.